Let me start out by thanking everyone for posting your questions and making this video possible. Let's get started. When a business is on record and the owner wants to sell, does the owner need permission or just hand over a percentage of the sale? Will the new owner be encouraged to also be on record? An owner of a business has the right to sell. Most likely, whoever he is with will expect an envelope after the sale. As for the new owner, I'll share a quick story. One day I met with Gambino member Blaze Corazzo at a bar called CJ's in Queens. At some point, he told me that the old owner was with him but sold the business. And I said something about the new owner being with him too. And he told me I came with the building. So in that scenario, the new owner was also put on record. Was there any bizarre tactics used in sit-downs? As I've mentioned before, there's a funny story about a Lucchese Bonanno sit-down that I was involved in, but it has to wait because I'm waiting on a picture. The next person brought up street gangs and wanted to know if the commission decides what gangs to recognize. Also, if an associate could be in a street gang. I wouldn't use the title commission. In present time, I don't believe any of the bosses is recognizing street gangs. And if they use them for one reason or another, then that's the extent of their recognition. An associate could be involved in a street gang unless the person he's with doesn't want him to be. This person, like many others before him, wants to know if the mob will eventually make non-Italians. And I'll respond to this for the very last time. It's a hard no. Personally, I find it strange, and it's almost as if people hope that they could join the mob. Again, I'll repeat myself. You don't pick that life, it picks you. And you would think after all that's been exposed, all the treachery spoken about, no one in their right mind would want to be associated with these people. But to each his own. Moving onward. What are the roles and responsibilities for sponsoring someone for membership? Are there any repercussions for a sponsor if the new member becomes a government cooperator? There is no role. The responsibility is you going to your captain and vouching for someone, or a captain vouching for someone that he wants to help. You're responsible for bringing an associate around, and more importantly, proposing him for membership, and can be dealt with repercussions if that person cooperates. Years ago, more than likely you'd be killed. I don't believe that to be the case today. This next person wants to know, with the mob's history of treachery, why would anyone want to get involved knowing this? The total opposite of what the last person asked. And he's correct. This was something I was guilty of myself. I was given good advice and told to stay away, advice I never took, but I had to learn the hard way. What would you say was the most frightening, dangerous moment you experienced when you were in life? I'll scratch the word frightening, but the most dangerous experience that took place was right before I was inducted, and I'll add a link down below to the video explaining the entire story. In a nutshell, I went alone to a meeting in the Bronx and was locked in a restaurant with a bunch of guys. I wasn't afraid, but naturally I was very concerned, as I only had a knife on me and two of the guys had pistols. Did Ciro Perone's son ever face any consequences for the money he stole from his father that resulted in Johnny Santori being chased? I don't believe he suffered anything more than a tongue lashing from his father, and he was instructed to find Johnny Santori so that they could correct the wrong done to him. I know after learning John was innocent, Ciro felt bad and afterwards kept John around him until he passed away. Was there anyone in the life that you saw had the potential to be successful had they not chosen this path in crime? An abundance of people, in my opinion, could have been very successful in any legitimate business had they chosen to. How did the organization interact with neighborhoods that they operated in? Were there ways to earn respect without violence or intimidation? Years ago, when neighborhoods were replete with social clubs, civilians felt protected by the crews operating in their neighborhood. Times were different back then. The mob was feared and respected at the same time. Does the mafia still influence boxing today, or are those days long gone? To put it bluntly, the days of the mob's long reach is definitely gone. As for boxing, I honestly don't know whether they are or aren't involved. During your incarceration, did you ever meet anybody connected to the families in upstate New York? Not really. There was one guy named Richie who claimed his uncle was a boss, but we quickly learned he was a bean shooter and chased him. How did certain individuals get out of prison for multiple murders, yet my Uncle Henry is going to die in there? Okay, This person's obviously referring to Joey Testa and Anthony Senna being released, and is also speaking about Henry Borelli, who he said is his uncle. Henry Borelli was part of the DeMeo crew, as was Testa and Senna. He was initially convicted of 2 murders and transporting stolen property, specifically stolen cars that were being shipped to Kuwait, other areas in the Middle East, Puerto Rico, and throughout the United States. In April 1986, he was sentenced to life for the murders and 150 years for the stolen car counts, 15 in total, and 10 years per charge. The murder convictions have since been overturned, but the court upheld the 150 years for the transport and stolen property. The one thing most people can agree on is that the legal system is extremely unfair, where some people get lucky, others do not. For example, I wouldn't be able to count the number of guys in prison for murder and murders that only served 25 years or less and were released, including myself. Yet a guy like Joey Fama is still in prison after 34 years. What society believes is the appropriate amount of time for a murder, I don't have the answer. But if 1,000 other guys and myself are now walking around society, then so should Fama or Borelli for that matter. Let me quickly mention the super thanks icon found in the 3-dot dropdown beneath the video, put there for anyone who wants to show appreciation for these videos. The next person asked a hypothetical. Could Paul Castellano be convinced to retire? After all, there were precedents where other bosses agreed to retire. The answer is simple. I don't believe so. Here's why. Paul Castellano had an air of superiority and would never concede to stepping down. In fact, he was so high up on his horse that he never believed anyone would splatter him outside of that steakhouse. And for the last question, a person wanted to know if I thought that the Bananos still had a Canadian faction. I did respond to his comment, and I believe I said something to the effect that I honestly had no idea and that I always assumed that they did. Nonetheless, while researching, I came across something that shed some light on the Bananos and their Canadian faction. Following the murder of George from Canada's Shasha, Joe Messino wanted to take the Canadians' pulse. Apparently, the Rizzuto and Shasha families were very close, and Vito Rizzuto was extremely hurt when he heard the news of his murder. Messino was concerned and didn't want a war with the Canadians. As we know, he even attempted to make the murder look like George from Canada was killed over a drug deal and not by the Bananos. So he sent Sal Vitale to Montreal to speak with Vito Rizzuto, who was the boss there. Rizzuto told Vitale, "We're our own little family. We stay by ourselves," which was a strong indication that the Canadian faction, once loyal to the Bananos, had severed its ties.